By the way, the same problem occurs within a large firm, which is using its own product from one department as an input into product from another department. So you have, so to speak, socialist entities all over the place. General Motors Corporation or General Electric are, to some extent, socialist enterprises. And they operate with this thing. Now, notice when I started. I'll try to get it short. You have 10 minutes. 10 minutes, okay. Now this comes up, it probably comes up in another way. Again, coming back to the question of provision for the future. But there's one characteristic, the provision of the future is sometimes referred to as putting up capital, and that's where capitalism is. Now, there were, of course, sort of capitalist enterprises back into the Middle Ages, some of the city-states, like Florence, certainly were operating in ways that all that different from today. Out in the countryside, we had a feudal system and things worked differently. But one thing that when capitalism really became dominant, you had large enterprises, it was a brand new phenomenon, which really had never occurred before. Maybe really occurred, I think, really, there's some 18th century examples, but in the early 19th century, they systematically. The idea of the business cycle and the financial crisis. We have one, we're going through one right now, both in the United States and Europe. But this is not new. It was noted, I believe, in 1819 was the first example, where somehow there was no floods, there were no droughts, there was nothing, and yet people were unemployed, being laid off. There was a lack of demand somehow. And this has been a recurrent feature of capitalism. And to blame people who might talk about government interference, the government played a tiny role in the whole 19th century, which was marked by repeated and sometimes extremely severe. The 19 wasn't so bad, but 37, 73, 93, these were major things. We were years, and banks would fail, financial crises, banks would fail all over the place. People couldn't borrow money when they wanted to because there was no bank to lend it to. Phenomena very much like this occurred repeatedly through the 19th century, and that in spite of everything that's happened, they have not ceased. Now, Oscar Morgenstern, another Wall Street economist, the Austrians were very prolific. Had a very exciting intellectual group in this period, and not only in economics, of course, it's architecture, psychoanalysis, whatever. Was director of a business cycle research institute in Vienna. And he of course, predicting turned out to be rather difficult. I must say I was a graduate student in economics, and then war came and I became a meteorologist, like that. And well, I'm going to deal with science now, real hard stuff. Of course, the predictability wasn't a bit better in meteorology with all the scientific background. It wasn't economics. But anyway, Morgenstern was concerned, and he said, well, look, if I'm trying to predict the future, make an investment or save or something, I know the world that I'm dealing with is built up out of other people's behavior. And other people's behavior, how they invest or what they do. And other people's behavior depends on their forecasts of what I do. So I forecast, you get into, now, there's always this question of two ways of when things are mutually dependent. There are two things that can happen. Things can go to hell, and we'll come back. And the other argument is you get equilibrium. That's the economists always like to find equilibrium. I think that's been our problem. That's been my problem. Morgenstern took one particular story. I don't know if many people are Sherlock Holmes fans anymore, but there's a famous episode when Sherlock Holmes is dealing with Moriarty. The whole thing is a wonderful anticipation of game theory. As the line made at one point, Moriarty says, doubtless my next question has crossed your mind, to which Holmes replies, and doubtless my answer has crossed yours. But in the course of this, Holmes is fleeing from Moriarty. If he stays, he'll be killed. Anyway, Moriarty follows him in another train, and he has a choice of getting off at an intermediate station or going on to Dover and then on to the continent. And Moriarty, of course, has to make the same choice. If they're in the same place, Holmes is dead. Well, you can see that this is a game without an equilibrium of pure strategies, to put it, as we'd say, in a very elementary way. And anyway, it was a question of that each one's belief about the other. Now, Morgenstern uses as an example. It was in the book on when he worked with von Neumann. He said, "Oh no, with mixed strategies we can get rid of this." But mixed strategies really means beliefs. What do I believe about it? So for me to optimize depends on my believing something about your strategy. Now, if you think about it, it's very unstable. If I get the other person's probably just a little bit wrong, I'll go to the extreme. I'll go to a pure strategy. If you think about it. So that shows some of the problems. Now, let me just say a few words. So information becomes, and suggests the possibility of instability. This had, by the way, it was independently of Morgenstern and Austin said about the same time by Keynes, who cited as an example, supposing that he found that some beer, this is a prohibition that just ended, and some a beer producer in the United States had a contest where you had 6 models. You voted for one of them, and if yours got the majority, if the leading candidate of the 6 was your choice, you got a prize of some kind, which of course meant that you were not really picking the prettiest girl, but you were picking the one who you thought other people thought was the prettiest. And of course, if you go back, it's the one that you thought, you go back, this is an infinite regress, and you go back, and the question is, infinite regresses, once they cost them, become impossible. If you assume that the process of calculating is relevant, then this becomes impossible. But how do you have a theory of what's optimal when you take account of the cost of calculating the optimality? This is, really tries to describe Herb Simon's idea of bounded rationality as rationality with taking account of confusion. I think, but the trouble is that problem is a harder one than when you start. Let me just say a few words. The information becomes a commodity. I really want to know what other people are doing. I want to know what technological progress is likely to be, what my competitors are likely to invent, all these sorts of things. For example, if I'm buying security, I want to know what the probability that's going to... Let's stick to rational discussion, by the way. Never mind going to completely irrational. Just behavioral, what we call behavioral economics. Just assume that each individual is maximizing expected utility based on a subjective probability. But there's nothing guaranteeing that the subjective probabilities are equal. Okay. Let me just say, information becomes a commodity. It's valuable to me. Its value does depend on the scale on which I'm going to use it. But it's a funny kind of commodity. It's costly to acquire. I have to do some performances. And I can transmit it without losing it. If I have a ton of steel and I sell a ton of steel, I no longer have the steel. If I tell you something, I still got the information. It can be reused. I can use it over and over again. One of the results is you get specialization. It pays to be a doctor. It doesn't pay me to acquire all the medical knowledge in the world, because I'm going to use it only once. Or it doesn't pay me if I'm sick to learn all about my sickness. A doctor will use the same knowledge over and over again. So it pays to specialize. This means people now know that they're giving people who know more than they do. I can go on to that. Finally, let me just mention one problem. Suppose we start with people having different probabilities. Now, supposing there's some event in the world which does not affect me at all, doesn't affect anybody. I mean, my satisfaction level, utility, whatever you want, doesn't depend on it. But there's an event which occurs and which we get different probabilities about. It becomes reasonable to create a market in which we bet on it. It's pretty clear that this is a net loss. I think this is one aspect. I don't know the details. but there's a net loss to society. So you're creating an unequal distribution of income where you have an equal, get started with an equal distribution. That gives you one example. And you can state this in several different ways. So I leave you with a lot of paradoxes about knowledge. And they have practical economic consequences, and I suspect, although I don't have a good theory, that a good deal of what's happened in the recent times is clear to us. You see, the problem with explaining some of these bets is not why a firm in the modern world bets by borrowing money and betting on what the stocks do. The person does not, the question in my mind is not why the person bet. That's the rewards are so great, maybe you take a chance on being wiped out. The question is why the lenders lend. This is, I find, these are, remember, generally people in the business. They have a lot of previous knowledge about risks. They have a lot at stake. One of the problems with the, go back to the long-term capital management affair in 1998, the lenders, the amounts of interest involved, that the Federal Reserve was concerned that those lenders would be affected and they would have subsequent consequences. Imagine a bank which has so much at stake in lending to one firm. Why do they lend? And the question is, how do they form their beliefs, which would lead into this? And of course, we saw this in a much bigger form in 2007, 2008. So I think this question of how you handle information as a commodity has got some rather real consequences. Thank you.